Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conference, Learning and Meta-Learning with Deep Neural Networks. We have here today with us Florin. He's a computer scientist with Bitdefender in Bucharest, and also, I'm happy to say it, he has a bachelor degree in philosophy. So I hope that this bringing together of two very different fields will help us today get a feeling of what a research program in artificial intelligence looks like, and maybe get a grasp of innovations like ChatGPT and GPT, I think it's called. So Florin, please.
Okay, thank you, Andrea, and thank you for having me here. It's truly a special occasion for me because back then when I was hoping to actually be a researcher in philosophy or humanities in general, delivering a presentation at New Europe College, or I don't know, studying here was kind of a rite of passage for, actually being a researcher. So yeah, it's truly a special occasion for me. Thank you to the organizers for extending this invitation. Also, I think that indeed this is kind of a good moment in time to start broadening the discussion regarding these kinds of models, because there's indeed something interesting happening in the sense that they're kind of leaving the research laboratories and are starting to get into production, are starting to get online, and rightfully so, people are starting to take notice of them, right? And we kind of need a broader, opinion of how to start interacting with these systems. Okay, so I want to show you how research kind of looked like in this field when I started like 6 or 7 years ago. For example, the first cover, the first Nature cover, the one at the back, actually, right? In this slide here, was introducing one of the first reinforcement learning systems that was able to learn to play like 57 games on a fairly challenging Atari console at that moment. And this is literally the paper that kind of made me get into the field. A couple of years later, just by scaling up these kind of methods and adding some bells and whistles, a system capable of playing Go was also introduced from researchers at DeepMind. And I don't know, if you'd wait for like another year, this kind of general system turns out that was able to play actually multiple games like chess and shogi, not only Go, right? It was basically the same kind of architecture, the same kind of learning dynamics, but was capable of playing multiple games without changing much of it. And this theme of generalization kind of repeats itself in this field, right? So you then wait for like another 2 years, and you'd see these models kind of starting having results in actual research fields like protein folding, right? So what you see in this plot here is another cool result from the same lab, where a large neural network is trained to predict the 3D structure of proteins out of the amino acid sequence, right? And you can see that the field was kind of stagnating in the sense that this is basically a challenge, a contest that was happening every 2 years, right? And you can see in gray that the performance was not improving. They were basically using, methods that were specific to the field, and the introduction of neural networks kind of produced a large bump in performance. And of course, the next year you'd see the paper in Nature, and I think at this point someone was estimating that this kind of system is basically doing the job of one PhD student that was, during his entire PhD was working on a single protein, on the folding of a single protein, right? And this system was able to do this like in seconds, right? And then, like a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago, right? Systems that are able to model large distributions of images and align them with representations of words are now able to generate images out of simple textual descriptions, right? So this is an example I like a lot. Is not photorealistic. Is not like the examples you see all over the web right now. These three are images generated based on descriptions of the invisible cities of Italo Calvino. And you can see how the system kind of figures out what are the specifics of each of these cities. For example, for Valdrada, it figures out that this is a city built on lakes and has many verandas, and it's also there are no more people in it anymore. And the last one is also interesting because in Ersilia, to establish the relationships that sustain the city's life, the inhabitants stretch strings from the corners of the houses, white or black or gray or black and white, according to whether they mark a relationship of blood, of trade, authority, or agency. And I can easily see any of these, images kind of being used as covers for a book of Italo Calvino's. However, very recently, things started to feel a bit different in the sense that, okay, the capability of these systems indeed increased, and they are more general than ever. For example, this is a screenshot from GPT-4, in which a user inputs a description in natural language for a application, right? A mobile application that should recommend 5 movies, right? So you open the application and you want 5 movies being recommended. And GPT is able to basically generate the code necessary to build the application. You still need to do some work in the sense that you need to take that code and you need to compile it and so on and so forth. But actually, it requires very little intervention at this point, and the code is mostly correct. So this is kind of unprecedented for code generation. This kind of capability was impossible like 1 or 2 years ago. And this is just one example, right, of code generation, right? And then, this was happening Monday, and Tuesday, you find out that similar systems, like the ones that are able to, recreate Italo Calvino cities, are also able to, dress the Pope in like an expensive designer jacket, which is kind of strange, considering that he's a member of the Jesuit order. And it kind of influences the way you perceive him, right? If you don't figure out that this is a fake. And then on Wednesday, you'll find papers from cognitive scientists that kind of argue that theory of mind spontaneously emerges in this kind of systems. And how did they figure this out? Well, they simply gave the test that they give to children in order to test if they have a theory of mind. And ChatGPT is able to, GPT 3.5 is able to resolve to solve these tests in 70% with 70% accuracy, and GPT-4 goes to 95%. So what is happening here? Well, it turns out that finally the next day there's a rebuttal, and you find out that actually if you kind of change these tests a bit in the sense that you rephrase them, the results kind of get turned on their head. So there is something here, but it seems to be a bit flaky. And then another paper shows up that kind of argues that the impact on the workforce will be huge, and it's expected that in the United States, 80% of the workforce to be impacted by these kinds of systems. And it's Thursday, and there are already kind of open letters to pause to pause large model experiments. So yeah, and this is just what happens during the week. So we don't know what we'll get on Friday tomorrow. So I wanted to kind of unpack this, right? It's clearly that this is the right moment to start discussing about this. I will argue that it's really nothing mysterious about these models. I will try to argue that they are using very simple learning principles that, in combination with scaling up computation data, are actually able to elicit kind of unexpected behavior, and we'll try to discuss what this unexpected behavior is. Okay. Now, in order to understand what's happening, I'll do a short introduction in neural networks and how to train them. And one thing I like to do is to think by analogy what happens in science in general. So science managed to be quite successful applying a fairly simple method, and that is, just express anything as a function, in the sense that you basically have scores of researchers that sift through large quantities of observational data, and they try to propose functions that fit to that data. They create tests in order to gather new evidence and see if those functions fit. And what you end up with are some simple functions. And no matter if you're interested in predicting the position of some object at the next point in time, or the population sizes of species that are interacting in an environment, or I don't know, you want to figure out what would be the function of a protein based on its structure, or what would be the behavior of some animal given some stimuli, you generally manage to, in science, you generally manage to write down some function that is fairly simple, does not have many parameters, mostly some constants. But what's important about it is that it encodes our knowledge and our assumptions about the world, right? So in this sense, these functions are not purely predictive, but are also explanatory. Now, in machine learning, we kind of throw the bathtub with the baby in it, in the sense that we give up the structure that a model in science usually has, and instead we kind of over parameterized these functions in the sense that we now have functions of many free parameters. We encode very little structure about the world in these functions. But we also gain something when we are doing this, because neural networks are basically universal function approximators. Even very simple one layer neural networks in the limit of the number of neurons is actually able to represent any interesting function we might care about. It can represent it, but this theorem does not, ensure that we can also construct it or we can learn it. But it's good enough in many senses, right? Now, what we gain in terms of generality, we kind of lose in terms of explainability, right? So we gain a lot of predictive power when we are doing this, but we kind of lose the ability to figure out what leads to the to a decision that a neural network computes, right? Given some input. Okay. Now we ended up with a large function with many parameters. How do we fit it to the data, right? And in order to get a sense of that, I want to make clear what people in machine learning understand through model, because it might be a bit different from other areas. So in general, a model is the combination of data, some kind of function approximation. In our case, that function approximation is a neural network, and very importantly, a loss function. This loss function is something really simple. It's basically a distance most of the time, and tells you how far off your neural network is compared to some kind of label you get in your data. So you might imagine that you have a data set of images with some objects in them, and for each image in the data set, you also have a label that tells you what is in that image, right? And this loss function will tell you how far off your network is from that target. Okay. And then you also have something that is not represented in this picture here, and that's an optimization algorithm that allows you to to adjust the weights of your neural network in order to actually learn a function that is able to fit the data, right? And now we have everything we need in order to understand how the learning process actually happens. So first, let's kind of make sure we are on the same page regarding what this picture here is, and I'm referring to the neural network in the middle. You can think of a neural network not only as a large collection of weights, but basically a composition of very simple functions, right? So in this picture here, you have a neural network. Actually, it could be fully functional based on this drawing. That has two inputs, in the sense that it will accept data that has two dimensions. For example, the position of some object in the plane, right? Where you have the XY coordinates. And it has a single input, just for ease of explaining. And it also has like 9 neurons, which are depicted by these large circles here. I think they're called neurons mostly for historical reasons, in the sense that at this point it's really hard to make a strong analogy between the biological neurons and artificial neurons. They're working in completely different ways. What they have in common is that if you look, for example, at the topmost neuron in in the second column here, right? You can see that it takes the input, it multiplies it by the two weights which are on the edges. The dots, the dark dots here are the weights we are going to learn, right? And they are simple numbers. They are like scalars, right? So there are like 20 weights in this function in total, right? And the edges represent practically the information flow in the neural network. So the first neuron here takes the input, multiplies it by the two weights, applies some simple nonlinear function, and then the result is being passed to the next layer, to the next neurons, and so on and so forth. Each collection of layers, each column of neurons are usually called, a layer. And the more layers the network will have, the deeper it is. And this is the reason, for the name, for deep learning, right? It's related to this increase in depth of neural network estimators. Now, we have our neural network. It receives at the input some image, right? And it will output some value, right? In this case, a label. And let's say we have trained this network for a while, so it's not completely from scratch. So that when we gave it, when we give it a picture of a unicorn, it will actually produce the prediction course. So it's off by just a bit. It misses it misses the horn, right? Now, the loss function will produce, again, a real valued scalar that will be very large and very negative, and it will say that the prediction is wrong. And we have an algorithm that uses this value and propagates this error back through the network, basically giving a direction and a magnitude of how to change each of the network's weights in order to improve the prediction at the next moment, right? At the next time we see this image, right? We have our new set of weights, and we can expect next time, right, when we present the same example, that now the error will be smaller, maybe, right? And the change in weights will be accordingly small, right? So this is a sketch of how these algorithms work. I think the name backpropagation came from an article from '86, so we know about it for quite some time. But actually, it's been used to train these kinds of systems for even earlier. And honestly speaking, it's simple enough that probably Leibniz could have, write it down, because it's just calculus. Now we have our model. How do we test it? How do you know that it's actually learning something interesting? The way to think about this is that most of the time, probably you won't have access to the full data that comprises the universe you're interested in, right? The domain, the domain you're interested in. You'll only have a tiny bit of it, right? But what you hope is that the network you train is able to actually perform well on the entire domain, right? So you have only a tiny bit of training data, and you hope to perform well overall. So what you do in practice, you actually try to sample from all over the support of the domain you're interested in, right? So here the bullets in yellow is also training data, but now they're kind of spread over the entire field. And what is of utmost importance is that you also have some kind of test data set that it's sampled in the same way. You don't use it during training at all, and you evaluate on it in order to figure out if your model actually is able, to generalize, right? And these are basically the kind of the core tenets of training these kinds of models, right? Okay, so just to give you an example of how efficient this general scheme is, this I'll show you the results from what is called the 2012 ImageNet challenge, which was, I mean, it was one of those key experiments that basically changed the face of the domain, in the sense that 2 years prior, there was this large data set introduced, this large benchmark, which comprises of 1 million images, training images, with objects in 1,000 classes, right? This is the training data. And the images kind of vary across many dimensions, in the sense that there are, you have animals, you have objects. Some images are more cluttered than others. There are, in some instances, there is just, in some images, there is just one instance of the object you're interested in, and some there are many more. So there was quite a lot of variety in that data. And in 2010 and 2011, the systems that were based on, the handcrafted kind of code by computer vision researchers that were, maybe getting all kinds of inspiration from I don't know, the human vision or animal vision or stuff like that. They were doing fairly okay, in the sense that they had like 28% accuracy, something like that. But in 2012, the first deep neural network is being introduced, and you can see this, a large increase in accuracy right away. Basically, this is a neural network trained exactly as I've shown you before, on consumer hardware for like 2 weeks or so, and it was able to learn from scratch to such degree that it overtook systems that were far more engineered and were kind of containing a lot of the human knowledge regarding vision. Right, and this was just the starting point, in the sense that from now on, all the entries in this contest will be, neural networks, and in just a couple of years, neural networks are able to actually, have a better accuracy than humans, in the sense that they actually put a human to, to go through like, I don't know, 100,000 images and classify them, and they figured out what was his error rate. So one trend you should also get from this picture here is that deeper neural networks with more layers generally do better. And this was one of the first signs that this kind of scaling up the models, this kind of scaling up the computation is important for the domain. Also, to give you some insight into what these models were learning, look in the first column here, and you'll see these kind of weird shapes that are oriented in various ways. These are actually what are called edge detectors. They were really well known in computer vision because people figured like decades ago how to detect edges in images, and they came up with similar kernels. What's interesting here is that this network learned them by its own, from the data alone, right? So you get this kind of stuff without encoding any knowledge. You only get it from the data. I have a better representation for the next two columns in that image. So here, because when you go deeper in the network, we cannot look at the kernels the way we did for this first column here, and we need to do some tricks in order to figure out what a neural network is. But the important bit to take from here is that these representations, these learned representations, tend to be hierarchical in nature, in the sense that on the layers that are closer to the input, you get these, edge detectors. Then maybe the next layers learn stuff about textures, about patterns. You see some kind of increase in complexity here, right? You start to get parts like user interface elements, flowers, and I don't know. I'm seeing this is like a Rorschach test. It's interesting. And the final layers are starting to see, in the final layers, you start to see like body parts, right, and eyes and stuff like that. So there's clearly some kind of hierarchical nature of this of these representations, and this was also of critical importance, because it turns out that you not only learn these, but you can also reuse them, right? So you can take these representations and train new models with far less data, and even you can train new models on on different domains than the one where you initially trained. This kind of transferability of representations was critical in the rapid progress of deep learning. Okay, so here we have it. We have the first part of the the puzzle we want to unpack here, right? So we've seen that neural networks learn representations that are hierarchical and transferable, and also keep in mind this fact that neural networks are universal function approximators, even if it doesn't mean that we can also learn that function all the time. And we have the first hints that performance scales with depth and with training data, right? Now, in order to go to the other two aspects of the main theme of this presentation, I want to start discussing a bit about large language models, because they're kind of all the rage right now, and everybody's talking about them, and it's good to have a bit of context about them. And actually, they're also very good to illustrate the points I'm going to make, right? So, what is a language model? Well, again, it's a model that basically computes the probability of a sequence of words. So imagine you have like a sentence, right? This is a sequence of words, and you'd like to know what is the probability of generating that sequence, right? These by themselves are not that interesting. You actually care about autoregressive language models. What these are? Well, these give you the probability of the next word given a sequence of words, and this is the interesting part, because now I can give a neural network at the input. I can give it part of a sentence, and I would expect that it will be able to produce the next word properly, right? So there's this example from Chomsky that was actually used to illustrate the fact that probabilistic language models are faulty, and he did this by introducing this sentence that is syntactically correct but has no obvious semantics. And that is colorless green ideas sleep furiously. You might have heard of it. So what would you want is that a neural network sees this prefix or context or prompt. This sequence is called at the input, and it will be able to output, with high probability, the word furiously. Okay. Now, how would we actually get to solve this kind of task, right? This next word prediction task. To give you some intuition, it's all about counting. So imagine this, forget neural networks for a moment. Imagine that you're able to take a large data set of text, like the entire Wikipedia, for example. And for the entirety of Wikipedia, you're able to build a table that contains all possible prefixes and their continuation, right? And the next word after that prefix, right? And for each of these pairs, you also count how many times it shows up in the it shows up in the corpus, right? So you build a huge table. Of course, it's not feasible to do this, but let's assume we can do this, right? And then if you were to do this, you'd be able to actually compute the probability of the next word given the sequence. And how would you go about that? Well, you simply look into your table that you just built. You take all the instances in which this prefix here shows up, so colorless green idea slip, right? And you use it to normalize the count for the sequence we are interested in, right? So we are interested in colorless green idea slip furiously. You take all the other sequences that end up differently, right? And you compute the probability of that word given the sequence, right? Now, of course, again, we cannot do this in practice, but we can use a neural network in order to approximate this table. Right? And what's interesting is that actually the objective that we use, so the loss function that we use in order to train this neural network, is kind of closely related to this equation here I was showing you here. So in order for the neural network to be able to learn the probability of a word given a sequence, it actually needs to kind of know the number of times it appears in the corpus. Also, this is not a new idea. So this is a paper from, this is the paper actually, that basically triggered the whole field of information theory and to some extent artificial intelligence. It's written by Shannon, and it basically bootstraps the whole information theory field. And here he was experimenting on paper with he was counting words. He was counting letters, bigrams and trigrams. So basically sequences of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 letters, and was trying to see if he could come up with a generative model based on the frequency of the letters, right? And he remarks that, look, for a sequence of like 6, if you take into account like 6 letters, you get something like attack on English writer that the character of this. So he says it's not unreasonable. Of course, it does not have any semantic, but this is what he was able to do with like pen and paper, right? And just to give you an idea how he did this, so to construct 3, so example 3 there, for example, one opens a book at a random and selects a letter at random on the page. This letter is recorded. The book is then opened to another page, and one reads until the letter is encountered. The succeeding letter is then recorded, turning to another page. The second letter is searched for, and the succeeding letter recorded, etc. So he was doing this because he didn't actually have tables of counts in order to be able to just pick up the counts from, so he invented this way of sampling at random. But what's important is that he's kind of envisioning that a sufficiently complex stochastic process will give a satisfactory representation of a discrete source by, scaling up this kind of stuff. Okay, so I hope I convinced you this is about counting, but honestly, it's not only about this. Thing is that what neural networks are doing are also compressing the data. And to see this, imagine we would want to retrieve the probability of thunderously right? So the next word to be thunderously, given the same, the same prefix we've been discussing. Now, if this specific sequence is not in the table, then the probability is 0. However, a neural network will not give you this probability of 0. And why is that? Well, let's look at this example here. Imagine that you have these 3 sentences here. So colorless green ideas: sleep furiously, play furiously. And also you have this: he slept thunderously during the entire play, right? So what a neural network will do with these examples, it will figure out how to compress the representations for sleep and play during to the same, the same place in the vectorial space of the representations. And by doing this, it will be able to also, figure out that maybe furiously and thunderously can appear in similar contexts, right? So this is kind of different from what a table would do, right? Now you don't have a probability of 0 for this instance, and a model will actually be able to, to generate this kind of sequence. So it's more to this, right? Neural networks also compress the data so that similar words will have similar representations. Okay. Now, we can actually, so this was a very nice experiment from a couple of years ago, like 2015, where people started to look at, the vectorial representations of words learned by language models, and they figured out that if you take, for example, the direction and the distance from man to woman, and you apply the same, you apply it, for example, for the representation for king, and you try to retrieve that vector from that point in space, you will get the representation for the word queen. And you can do this for, many other domains. You can do this, for example, with capitals, with countries and their capitals, or I don't know, verb tenses, and so on and so forth. So this kind of indicated that neural networks really do compress the data, and they kind of push the representations to be close together if they have a similar meaning. Okay. So how do we evaluate these kinds of models? Well, so after we train them on this simple objective of next word prediction, we then try to figure out, if they are able to reason, or what is their level of knowledge about the world in general. So you see here a couple of examples from a benchmark of over like 200 tasks with multiple queries for each kind of task. So there will be questions like, what is the name of the element of an atomic number of 6? And it needs to output the word carbon, right? Or you would want to test for its ability to reason about causality. And you'll give it 2 pairs of sentences, like it started raining because the driver turned the wipers on, and the driver turned the wipers on because it started raining, and it needs to output the it needs to output a higher probability for the sentence that is causally correct, right? And surprisingly, they're also able to play chess. Why? Because there are large quantities of chess matches online in a textual form, that recorded all the positions during a play, during a game, and you basically you can give it a sequence of moves. No, sorry, you can give it the current state of the board, and it can output the play that can get to like checkmate, right? You also have stuff like math reasoning. You can evaluate it if it can, identify sarcastic comments. So that's nice. Logical entailment, this kind of stuff. So this is the way. Oh, by the way, this is a real example from the benchmark. I did not made it up. It's there. I don't know how I found it. Okay, so now we know how to train these models. We know how we evaluate them. Now I want to talk about two kind of surprising findings. So we already kind of knew. So and I also hinted out that scaling the model will basically give you some extra performance. But I wanted to point out that actually this is quite extreme in the sense that during the past few years, we've seen an increase at a rate that is actually doubly exponential. So this is exponentially on a logarithm scale, and this is huge, right? But it's clear that this is a large driver, in the performance of these models. And to give you, a more concrete representation of what this means, there's this really nice paper from like 3 years ago that again kind of embodied the community to go disrupt. And they've shown that if you either scale the dataset size in the sense that you increase the number of words in your dataset, training dataset, or you increase the number of weights of free parameters in your model, right? In either cases, you get a decrease in the error at test time, and this is predictable, right? So it's like a scaling law. Basically, at this point, we just know that you only need to increase the data or increase the model, and you'll get better models, right, in the end. So this was kind of cool, and people, I think, didn't really realize how powerful this actually was at the time. Some did. They did t-shirts with this, and yeah, they're on sale. Okay. Okay. Sorry. So, in fact, this should work. Yeah. Okay. Now, there's this really nice open letter by the leading researcher in reinforcement learning that it's called the bitter lesson. It's a really short paper. It's a really short letter, like a couple of paragraphs. And already in 2019, he kind of saw that this is the way to go in AI. And just to give you some takeaways from there, the biggest lesson that can be read from 70 years of AI research is that general methods that leverage computation are ultimately the most effective, and by a large margin. AI researchers, so he goes on and say that, look, this is happening all over again. AI researchers have often tried to build knowledge into their agents. This always helps them in the short term, right? In the long run, it plateaus and even inhibits further progress. And breakthrough progress eventually arrives by an opposing approach based on scaling computation by search and learning, right? And I remember the pushback from the community that this paper received when it appeared. But it turns out that it was right, because in the past few years, this is all we did, basically. Okay, so we have a way forward, but I mean, why is scaling effective, right? We didn't answer this yet. Now, for the scaling the models part, what's important to realize is that networks that perform well, they're doing so by finding efficient representations of the data, right? So this means that they learn good models of the world from where that data is being pulled, right? But these world models are actually kind of complicated to learn. So it kind of makes sense to have larger networks with larger capacity and, more expressivity in order to be able to learn these good, efficient, compressed representations of the world. Now, the scaling data bit. This seems a bit self-evident, but it's actually more subtle in the sense that next word prediction is not a single task. When you need to predict the next word for a riddle, a logical puzzle, a game of chess, right? Or even a plain conversation, this means in effect that we are training our network on a large, varied collection of different tasks. So this is not a single task, right? Because meanings carry, words carry meanings in different meanings in different contexts, right? So basically, this is a multitask problem, and language is kind of a privileged domain in which to do learning. Okay, so we kind of have our, I hope we explained, the second bit of this manifesto here, and that is scaling data and models pays off, and appears to offer a clear path for these models. And I want to present you the last bit of the puzzle, right? The last piece of the puzzle. The emergent behavior. So what is happening here? What people soon realized was that these models, after you train them, right? So you're not allowed to change their weights anymore, right? You don't try to feed them to the data anymore, but you can do this. You can give them a couple of examples in the prefix, in the context. So in this example here, you say that, you give it this sentence like circulation revenue has increased by 5% in Finland. And you also give it the label. This is positive, right? So this is a task called sentiment analysis, where the model needs to figure out if a statement is positive or neutral or negative, right? And you give it a couple of examples like this, and then it turns out that the model is able to adapt to this new task and actually output the right label, even if it was not trained on this task. And even if it's not changing its weights anymore. So it's not training in the usual sense, but it's kind of applying some kind of inference algorithm at runtime, right? It learned how to quickly adapt to new situations in order to resolve the task. All right, and you can do this for multiple tasks, right? For example, in the right side, you can see that it adapts to a task regarding the field from which the domain, from which those sentences are, like finance or sports, or whatever. And they can also do more crazy stuff. So, for example, you can instruct the model to create new mappings between concepts, right? So, for example, you'll give it some examples in which volleyball is mapped to animal, onions to sport, archery to animal, hockey to animal. So you see the relation here, and the model is perfectly fine to reproduce this mapping, right? So these are new abilities we were hoping to get from algorithms that are far more complicated. This is also called meta learning, not only in context learning. And people have been trying to get this to work, but it turns out that it's just emerging from a far simpler objective that is next word prediction. And this was a really surprising finding, right? And this is not a fluke. I mean, this is working on models that are really complicated. So Cosmos One is something that appeared like 2 weeks ago, I think. It's a model from Microsoft that is able to work not only with text, but also with images and audio, right? So it's a multimodal system, and it can pull some nice tricks. For example, you gave it this famous picture here. You ask it what's in the picture, looks like a duck, that's not a duck, then what it is, what's it, looks more like a bunny. And it even gives you a reason, right, of why it has bunny ears. It can explain jokes, apparently. But what I find more impressive is that it's actually able to also do in context learning. So in this example here, the model has not been trained on Raven progressive matrices. So these are standard IQ tests, right? Presumably, it didn't have this kind of data at training time, right? So the model is fixed at this point, and you give it a simple example, a single example, sorry, in which you give it the matrix and the right square to complete it, the right element to complete it, and then you test it, and it seems to be doing just fine. So it started to solve these kind of tasks that are multimodal. Okay. So yeah, this is the last bit of this theme, right? It appears that even simple objectives such as next door prediction are capable of can lead to models, assuming that you scaled up the data, you scaled up the model, right? Are leading to models that are able to elicit new kinds of behaviors. And this is kind of just scratching the surface, because there are some more interesting things with researchers have observed about this. So I don't know if there is any more time for one more slide. I guess not, right? Okay. So there's a question about what will happen when we run out of data, right? Because at this point, the largest models are probably trained for like 1 trillion words, right? So this is like the entirety of internet. And I think one way to go is simply by starting to allow these models to interact with the world like physically. So in this experiment here, you can see a large language model that was trained purely on text initially, right? Being adapted to basically just create a plan of actions, and this plan is given to some kind of robotic system that then uses it to move around the kitchen and do some tasks. What's interesting here is that this robot here has never walked into this kitchen before. It's the first time that it acts in this kitchen, and probably the task is new also, right? So this is again the kind of emergent behavior you would want to see, and with these systems kind of entering into production, you'd see larger the surface through which these models interact with the world becomes larger and larger, and we should expect their capability to increase. Okay, thank you. And sorry if it took a bit more than I expected.
No, it was really okay. Especially the last part was really impressive. I mean, for me at least. I think the custom here is now to thank you, and then invite the audience to ask questions, add comments, or yes, please.
Excuse me, could you please stop sharing?
Oh yes,
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh yes.
Thank you for your presentations. So if I understood, the language model can also learn inference rules. Yeah, and there's valid inference rules and non-valid ones. Modus ponens and modus tollens, for example, these are valid inference rules, but there's also non-valid ones, like if A entails B and B, therefore A. So is there a chance that a language model might learn to reason fallaciously, faultly?
It will happily do so.
Yeah, and what can be done to prevent this case?
So actually the hope is that this kind of ability I've just shown, the ability to kind of adjust at the inference time. Can also be used to kind of align the models with the correct way of reasoning in a certain instance. Also, keep in mind that these models are kind of a system, our system of averages. So although they will be able to, they will prove to be able to, faulty reasoning. The ability to actually, reason correctly is in there also, and most of the time they will be correct. Also, to be perfectly honest, next word prediction is just one of the objectives that is being used to train these models. It's the most effective by far, but some new methods are kind of entering into this field where you kind of direct your model based on signals that are not easily formalized in an objective. And possibly this could also be used in order to kind of guide your model to the proper way of solving a task in a given context. But yeah, generally they will happily learn all the rules and they will apply them, faulty or not.
Okay, thank you.
How much better is Cosmos-1 compared to GPT-4?
To be honest, at this point, so yeah, I had a slide. I actually have a slide on this. At this point, we can tell, and the reason is that there's this kind of weird trend in machine learning going on for a couple of months, in which test data started to leak into started to contaminate training data. So imagine that these models are trained on, on the entirety of internet at this point. And unfortunately, the benchmarks we were using to evaluate these models are starting to get into the training purpose. And then when this happens, it's not really possible to have an accurate evaluation of the models, right? So this is a recognized problem, and it's fairly new, but it's a big issue, and it's something that the community really needs to address really soon. Yeah, I cannot answer to the question, due to this fact. We don't have a scientific evaluation of these models at this point.
Have you tried GPT-4 with plugins?
I haven't, but the plugins is one of the reasons I think that the capability of these models will increase, because now you'll have the training data necessary to go beyond next word prediction. You're now kind of interacting with the world. You're letting these models, to figure out some other kinds of stuff regarding how to act in the world, and this can be used as a training signal too. So yeah, that's I kind of expect a major capability boost because of that kind of access to new tasks.
I will change a little bit the style of discussion, I'm afraid. But I have just a very stupid curiosity. Lelia and myself, we heard the first time about ChatGPT in December. And the person who told us is quite older than we are, but a brilliant person, a sociologist, writer, Wolf Lepenis in Berlin. And he was absolutely excited about ChatGPT, and we discussed a lot. And then he said he was very famous professor also, and he said the whole education system has to be reformed, reinvented, because you cannot teach anything now with ChatGPT. Do you think that we should be that optimistic or pessimistic?
Well, this is indeed an issue we are also confronted with, because so for example, in our team at Bitdefender, we are also kind of teaching a lot. We have courses at polytechnics, university, at the University of the Faculty of Mathematics, and we were confronted with this. We figured out that some of the homeworks we were giving, or assignments we were giving, in the past years, will now be basically solved with ChatGPT. From our perspective, what will need to change is the way we evaluate the students. So maybe not the way we are teaching, but the way we are evaluating them. That will need to change indeed. I don't know how. Yeah.
You know, I'm a professor in the music university, and I also talk to my students about these things, because I always try to give them assignments and exams that cannot be, well, everything can be copied or plagiarized, but I tried to, well, give them themes where they should be themselves. And the problem is that I can do this in my class, but what to do, for instance, in a class like music history, because there they have to learn things. So I cannot avoid ChatGPT, you know. So anything about history, I would challenge also my colleague Constantin, who is a historian. I mean, in these humanist disciplines, you have to memorize, to learn. I don't know, is still memorizing and learning important, and it will change, or I don't know. I told you I have.
I'll be honest, I don't have an opinion on this. People are split in the sense that some say that we will just, learn to use these systems the way we use Wikipedia right now, right? So, and I think some people said the same thing about the internet and Wikipedia when it showed up that, it will change education, it will change things. I do think that this kind of technology potentially has a greater impact than whatever came before. But maybe changes in evaluation are possible, in the sense that, I don't know, maybe we can go back to oral exams. It's just an idea, right? We cannot cheat an oral exam. It's of course it's hard to implement, right? It's hard to scale it up. A cute idea I've seen was to actually give students, so the professor kind of turned tables. So I've seen this a couple of days ago. A professor just generated some of the answers produced by, took the answers produced by ChatGPT and gave them to the class to be critiqued, right? So the students had to find the faulty reasoning and the faulty data in whatever GPT was outputting. But yeah, I agree. This is a big issue, and I'm not sure we know how to handle it at this point. And by the way, if we are on this topic, I don't think that anti-plagiarizing systems are ready for this either. So it's very easy to fool them. So
Yes.
Those are not robust either.
True.
My question is about the economic dimension, because you haven't talked about this. All this scaling up is driven by let's say capitalist factors, by the business behind, by the industry, and has developed so much that it becomes part of the infrastructure of our world. And my question is about the, are these algorithms, are they known? Are they open source? What's behind this? And the power that comes with this sort of, let's say, I don't know how
that's a great
to
question.
call it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and indeed, I should have, I should have put a slide about this. So, as opposed to some areas of science, artificial intelligence was quite blessed in the sense that everything was open source. And for a long time, every innovation in the field was fairly quickly being reproduced by the community. There was this, there is this culture of not publishing behind paywalls, right? So every paper is basically free in machine learning at this point. And there is a huge interest from the community to reproduce large results. So people only know about ChatGPT and the models that took the headlines, but there are tens and tens of other models, large models, being trained by various smaller organizations, and successfully so, in the sense that they are being used by downstream by companies and researchers and so on and so forth. So from this point of view, it's the premises are good. The problem is that in the past few months, like really, it's like half a year, there was a small change in this, in the sense that some of the large labs kind of hinted that maybe not all should be open. And the problem is that, for example, the papers that came with some of the models really didn't contain details about the training data, the model, the training procedure, and so on and so forth. Now there's a strong pushback from the community to this kind of stuff, and I hope it's just it's just something that it will not become a trend, right? I hope I answered the question.
I would like to ask a question too.
Oh,
It's more of a comment than a question, I think. It's coming more from, I don't know, the long history of philosophy and the interaction of philosophy with artificial intelligence, because you mentioned Chomsky and the big discussion that was taking place probably in the 90s about how an artificial agent cannot really make the distinction between syntactics and semantics. It can process a sequence of words in the right structure, but it can generate faulty meanings, like the example you've shown. And of course, this was some sort of a small assumption in how philosophers interpreted the Turing test. Why an artificial agent cannot pass the Turing test? Well, because human language is vague, for instance, while artificial language is precise because it's constrained by this structural grammar that that's behind it, and so on and so forth. But now these things seem to be like overcome. ChatGPT can easily deal with vagueness, can easily create poetry, can easily do stuff that is not constrained by this old paradigm that we've been used to for, I don't know, many years, until probably 2000 and something like that. And my question is it a revolution like in the Kuhnian sense in artificial intelligence? I mean, you mentioned some papers, you presented them so modestly, but in fact, this idea that basically you can use computation and solve semantics problems like generate vague language, generate poetry, do stuff like that. It really revolutionizes the way we understand a machine, in a sense. I'm a philosopher. I have to put these kinds of questions.
Well, I'm philosophy is a bit rusty, but well, I think you already gave the answer, right? So, I mean, it appears this is the case, and it kind of has all the elements in the sense that you have these crazy ideas like let's just scale things up, and you have a large portion of the research community that kind of pushes back and is not able to recognize that this is indeed something. So, for example, I was giving you the ImageNet example back in 2012, and I was showing you that plot where we already had some hints that simply by scaling the depth of the network, you will get better performance. And still then there were researchers that were thinking that this cannot be the case, in the sense that it was going against the established theorems we had in sample complexity on classical machine learning, in the sense that we had these, we had this strong theory that was telling you how many samples you need in order to learn some, learn some task with a given model, which were way more simpler than neural networks, right? And we had some, we had some strong theoretical background to believe that the optimization algorithm used in deep learning shouldn't be able to find the right function that also generalizes, right? So even back then, there were researchers that were not, still coming to terms with, this way of seeing deep learning. So in this respect, I think, yeah, there is something to this to it.
You should take the microphone, yes.
You said that these models use a big database from internet, but then do they use all the database? I mean, all the internet, or just parts of it? Or because internet is full of other things that are maybe wrong things or not correct things. How's the quality of the database taken into consideration when training these models? And
okay, so again, there are some research papers hinting that we might actually reaching the limit of the quality data we can collect from internet in a couple of years. So we are already kind of using most of the quality data on internet right now. And indeed, the established data sets used for training large language models have a couple of protocols in order to ensure that data that is good for training is being, used, it's being put in those data sets. And there's also research showing that you can actually push for different scaling laws if you have a higher ratio of quality data in your data set. So you can get away with smaller models and fewer data if the data has a higher quality. So one aspect of my answer is that this is research. This is an ongoing research question. And on the other hand, yes, there are some things that are put in place, but even so, I got a glimpse of something in your question, and you alluded to the fact that not all that data is good in all the senses.
now it's average.
Yeah.
There is not exceptional.
Yeah, and you can actually can see this in these models. So there are all kinds of ways of kind of bypassing the preconditioning of these models, and you can kind of make them to, generate offensive language or, a problematic language from many points of view. So yeah, the data is there and the models are trained on them.
Two more questions, very short. Since we tackle a little bit the issue of philosophy in conjunction with AI, how would you apply the philosophy of the accident of Paul Virilio to the emerging general AI? The first question. And the second one is, how can AI get results by being trained on dark web?
So regarding the first question, I didn't get the reference. So if you could maybe explain.
Yeah, okay. So there is a French philosopher, his name is Paul Virilio, and he's an expert in the philosophy of the accident. So he explains that in recent times, the human society is accelerating a lot. So there are things which are accelerating the human life and human actions, and AI, it's an example of accelerating things. By accelerating things, the likelihood of accidents, of catastrophe is growing exponentially. So my question was how this philosophy applies if we take in consideration the risks associated with the emerging general AI.
To be perfectly honest, I wouldn't be able to answer this question. I think this discussion needs to be really nuanced, and there are research centers working actively on this, and there are many people concerned by this kind of question. And they're, they're applying game theory in order to figure out, what is the proper policy to have in these kind of situations. So this is not, I don't feel like it's a trivial, you cannot give a trivial answer to this, right?
Okay, let's forget about this. Let's concentrate on the second question. How would you train an AI on the dark web for very practical results? I mean,
what would be the result?
Sorry?
What would be the result?
Well, for intelligence, for instance.
Well,
gathering intelligence.
You wouldn't train it on dark web. I don't know. Maybe I missed the question, or.
My question is about one of the most complex things that I see as a teacher of history is handwriting, which sometimes it's very difficult to read if you get to read some tests, for example, that you have with students. And I see that there are all these software that are very good at optical character recognition. And I was curious if this sort of artificial intelligence can help me read better very not nice handwriting. So is there any way in which you can use such sort of like artificial intelligence and all this coding to better decipher what also Michal is reading, like Ottoman handwritten documents?
So I'm pretty sure. So one of the first applications of neural networks was actually for sorting out letters back in the 90s, sorting out letters at the postal office or whatever, and you had to kind of decipher even including handwriting. I don't know what is the state of the art in this field. I think my colleague Anna has has more info about it. Okay, no, but I mean, I can get back. I can ask around and see what is, you know, the best software at this point for doing this kind of stuff. And I'm sure there is, and I can try to get back. I'm pretty sure that good solutions already are there. So
No. I mean, it's good for like typed documents, but not for
not handwritten.
handwritten. And it's not even close. I mean, it's getting better. It's getting better, but yeah.
Interesting. I'm quite surprised that there are no better solutions at this point, but yeah, okay.
If I may, just a short comments with regard to this. There are actually a couple of programs that are trained on specifically on recognizing handwritten text, but the problem is, like, because it's very idiosyncratic, it's actually they are very good for 19th century, because due to focus on calligraphy, a lot of people wrote more or less the same in the same style, so they're better. I'm using a couple, but for example, for my period, for 16th century and 17th century, it's absolutely terrible at recognizing what's written.
Now that you mentioned it, so I've seen a project from Japan where a PhD student worked hard to train a model that is able to recognize characters from symbols from a dialect that was not in use anymore, and they really needed that in order to parse large quantities of manuscripts they still had, but they didn't have specialists able to actually read it, right? But it was quite an intensive effort. I mean, she basically had to, you know, build a data set that, you know, first translated a couple of many manuscripts, you know, in the current dialect, and then train systems on that. So yeah, I can see how this could be a high intensive effort, but yeah.
Yeah, a naive and at the same time practical question from an outsider. I wonder, how can we learn from the AI development? What can we learn actually from AI development with regard to human deep learning? Is there anything which can help us to learn how to learn better, how to learn deeper? Is there anything which would help us to gain more insight into our own necessity to learn and our own drive for learning?
That's kind of a difficult question. So I'll try to give the easy answer, or the.
In neurosciences, I'm talking about human deep learning.
Okay. Okay, so if we are interested just, you know, on the kind of the performative part of learning, in the sense that, you know, I want to figure out how to retain information better, how humans can retain information better, for example. I know that there are, for example, there are programs like, you know, spaced repetition learning, which are now parameterized by maybe not neural networks, but machine learning models that figure out, you know, what is the proper frequency to in which to show you bits of information you were already exposed to, in order to increase the chance you retain that information over time, right? And you're using some kind of machine learning. Yeah, this is kind of exactly. Yeah, but now you kind of you start using AI in order to figure out what is the optimum way to you know, to provide that information. So yeah, this was kind of the. Now, regarding this interaction between neuroscience and deep learning, I'm by no means, you know, I'm no expert stuff regarding neuroscience, but I see a lot of discussion regarding how these two can, interact better. And on one hand, you see, for example, neuroscientists taking large vision models and showing, for example, that certain parts of the visual cortex learn representations that are well explained by the representations I've just shown you from those large vision models, a couple of slides ago. And they're making, they're kind of suggesting that maybe there is something in common there. The architecture of a vision model would look something like. On the other hand, the research here is a bit flaky in the sense that you'll often see papers arguing that this is not the case, and they are measuring the wrong thing. And so I would say at this point that there isn't that much, there isn't that much transfer from one domain to another, and certainly not from neuroscience to machine learning. In the sense that if I think what are the most important, technological contributions to the training of neural networks, those are not coming from neuroscience. There are stuff related to optimization. I don't know. There are little tricks that researchers arrived to empirically, and they have nothing to do with neuroscience. But I know that there is an effort in this sense. I mean, there are workshops, people are trying to, cross-pollinate here. I don't know if this answers your question.
I just wanted a second question for you.
They say that if they want to test a movie or some creative thing in a research, they'll probably kill it. So the research, so the probability that they use to, test if an ending of a movie or whatever, a commercial would work, is to put it in a research. And all the films or commercials put in the research, they end up badly. So they're not creative anymore. So they're not doing actually their job to surprise people. So is there a way to, and it looks like these models are trained based on, of course, probability, to encounter some things. So do you think they will get over this flaw, or they'll ever become creative as humans are? Or
I certainly hope so, because this is one of my major peeves. I'm always saying that I cannot watch a blockbuster movie anymore because they're all the same. I don't know if this is because of the machine learning that is put into. I've heard about the same, right? That scripts are being evaluated by machine learning models in order to figure out if they will work well, right? I don't know if the culprit is the machine learning involved or something else there. But this kind of touches another issue that I think is important. And so if there's this cycle of data that is being produced by generative models, or data that is being filtered by some kind of neural networks, right? As it is the case of, let's say, movies, right? You don't make the movies that are scored badly by a neural network, and that movie ends up in the general pool of data of the humankind. And there is this question if at least this generation of models is not kind of polluting the information sphere of the humanity, because you get all these, you get all these images and all this text that is being generated by neural models, and then the next generation of artificial intelligence will have to train on this not so good data, right? Yeah. So I don't know how we'll handle this. I mean, someone was telling me like yesterday that historians are going to have a field day in order to sort out, the generated data from the real data.
We will lose ourselves in this big data.
I don't know. This is a big issue.
Did they make any model for surprising people, or
Sorry.
did they make a model of how to surprise people?
So I didn't present it here, but actually ChatGPT is not only trained on on next word prediction, but it's all there's a second training stage involved in which the model is trained via something called it doesn't matter how it's called. The basic idea is that the model is being instructed to generate data or generate sentences that are kind of appealing to humans in some way or another. And we cannot really quantify what appealing means every time. So you basically train another model that tries to figure out, it gives a score that stuff is appealing. And in this way, you can actually also be able to guide a model to give, for example, surprising results. I'm pretty sure you can do this, right? But then it would be risky for the movie makers. I don't know. Maybe it will be too surprising. Yeah, so you definitely can do this.
Okay, thank you.
Alex, you.
Oh, okay. So if I understood correctly, deep neural networks are extremely accurate, but not all of them can explain their decisions. Only some of them can, offer explanations for taking a certain decision, for making, a certain categorization. How important do you think it is for such a model to be able to explain their decision?
Yeah, great question. I mean, this is an entire field in deep learning, and it's called explainability in AI. And for example, those representations I was showing you with textures and body parts, and it's coming from that field. People early on were trying to figure out what exactly a neuron is activating to, right, in an image, and they figured out how to create those representations, for example. Now, I would make just one clarification. Neural networks are not exactly accurate. Most of the time they're not really, and it really depends on the task, right? So if the task is really well defined and you have enough data, sure, you can get an accurate model. Even in those instances, an accurate model does not necessarily give you an accurate confidence in its prediction. So we call this that the predictions are not calibrated in the sense that, in the sense that I just said, right? So again, there's an effort in figuring out how to calibrate these models in the sense that they have a better grasp at what is, the true probability underlying a prediction, right? So right now, this is not happening. Or it is not happening well enough. And I don't even think it's really possible in the end to do this. But this is just my opinion. So if you have a follow-up question or please.
May I have a suggestion? Not a question, not a comment. We should follow the discussion over a glass of something and a pretzel.
But I still have one more question.
Please.
Everyone got the chance to ask at least one question. I can. It won't be long, but I'm trying to make it a little bit more polemic, if you want.
It is.
In the sense that, for example, you gave an example in which the artificial model basically predicted with a higher probability the right causal order of two events. the one with rain, with the raining and the windshields of the car. And earlier on, you said basically that these models, because they gain so much in generality, basically they lose in explainability.
Yeah.
So basically, yes, it follows on Alex's question. Is basically the question is, okay, he's very good at making with good probability the prediction that, well, it's more probable to have the windshield activated after the rain starts and so on. But does it understand causality? Does it really have a model of the world as you presented in the early slides? This is basically taking on GBS Pearl's questions from the Book of Why. It's not very original, the question, but it's a question that exists in the field.
So you already know Pearl's answer.
But I don't know yours.
So Pearl would definitely say that these models don't understand nil. It's just curve fitting. So it's just statistical. It's just a statistical correlation there. However, I really wanted to drive that point regarding compression and representations. In order to be able to actually, do a good prediction in next word prediction in that task, you often have to have some kind of working world model. You need to be able to keep track of things that happen in that context, at least. And this kind of sounds like it's going beyond simple statistical relations in there, right? So I didn't have a slide on this, but there is a very recent paper in which this kind of model is trained to play Othello. It's a board game. I don't know. It's like checkers or a bit like chess, something like that. Think of it as chess, right? So in order for the model to be able to, predict a good move, it needs not only to, have a good representation of the board, but it needs to understand what happened during the last few moves. And that paper shows that these models are actually creating a representation of that board game in their activations. So via compression, you get a very efficient representation and something that kind of looks like a world model. And this would kind of put a wrench in Pearl's idea also, because I mean, maybe it's possible with enough context, enough domain knowledge to start doing causal inference, right? To be able to, I mean, no, we are far from that, in the sense that for actually doing causal inference, you also need to do experiments. Right. So in order to have a proper causal model, you actually need to be able to intervene in the data and not only observe it. Right. And in order to do this, you actually need to do experiments. You need to do clinical trials. You need to do randomized trials, stuff like that. Right. We have a very reduced set of causal models in which you can do accurate causal inference without doing experiments, right? Maybe a generative model or a large language model will be able eventually to learn to do inference in these specific situations, right? Where we can do causal inference by pen and paper. Maybe it will get there too. But to broadly do causal inference, you actually needed to interact with the world. And yeah, I have a strong belief in this sense at this point, but not, I mean, for example, I think that Chalmers recently said that maybe this is not the case. Maybe language is all you need in order to have understanding. I mean, he was also kind of split between this, and he was not ruling out that maybe it's enough. I mean, they seem powerful enough most of the time, but yeah. My personal opinion is that you need to interact with the world. But
Okay, then we can close it here and move to the glass of wine and the pretzel. And thank you very much again for your presentation and for the discussions.
thank you again for all the occasion first and for all the great questions. It was really nice. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.